My concern with the filter debate is it's a little bit like the block size debate. It seems deceptively simple. Just like with the block size, the arguments are easy to reach. And of course it became very emotional. Op return is not the most harmful. It's not the cheapest way to do it. It's not the easiest way because they're all equally easy. What's the point? It doesn't matter if your node connects to 100 nodes that are filtering transactions. All you need to be connected to is one node that is willing to pass you the transactions unfiltered. And that's it. If we're trying to prevent a transaction from reaching you on a peer level, that's literally impossible.
Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. I've got Riccardo Spagni on the show. You may know him. Crypto OGs know him as like the Monero guy, but he's been talking a lot about Bitcoin lately, which is why I have him on. Riccardo, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So as I said, the OGs know who you are, but there's a lot of new folks, I think, who have no context. They don't know your alter ego, Fluffypony. It's the same ego, but the name Fluffypony. Give us a bit of your history and what brings us to this conversation today.
Sure. So, I started off in software development many, many moons ago. And eventually I had a bunch of side hustles. Eventually one of them popped off, and I had like some extra time in my hands, and I was reading Slashdot one day at the beginning-ish of 2011. And I read this article about a Google engineer who was building a library for Bitcoin. And I was kind of like, you're on Slashdot, you've read a couple of articles about Bitcoin, but you don't really pay attention. But this is 2011, and, my spidey sense goes, ooh, if a Google engineer thinks it's important, I need to read up on it, because it was 2011, Google engineers mattered, slightly less so today. And that engineer was Mike Hearn, who was working on a Bitcoin library. And so I started to take Bitcoin a bit more seriously, read the white paper, started reading up on it. Obviously, 2011, there wasn't that much on it. There was a lot of stuff on Bitcoin Talk, and you'd have to weed through stuff. And my first intuition was, this is never going to work. I totally misunderstood Nakamoto consensus. I thought, and it's kind of funny because it's very relevant to what we're going to talk about today. I thought that nodes matter. And so I spent a lot of time in 2011, late 2011, early 2012, trying to break Bitcoin. So I built a bunch of tools to try and attack Bitcoin by basically having Sybil nodes and try and surround a node with nodes that could give it bad data. And I thought I could override consensus by doing so. Total fundamental misunderstanding of that consensus and how it works. And I basically kind of snookered myself into loving Bitcoin by trying to break it and realizing I was dead wrong. And you can't help but love the elegance of the design when you've proven yourself so badly wrong. So from that, I got very interested in mining. I live in South Africa. South Africa is not an environment very conducive to large scale mining. So at the time I was GPU mining Bitcoin. I had laundry baskets with GPUs that were screwed into the side of the laundry basket with PCIe risers to a motherboard in the bottom. Total absolute nightmare from a static perspective. I actually don't know how I didn't fry more GPUs than I did. But I got so invested in the idea of mining, and I invented something called OpenRigs, which was a flat packable, stackable open air frame for GPU miners.
Yeah, I actually know that. I did my own stint in GPU mining. I'm familiar with that. Cool. I had no idea. So yeah. So that was my invention, and we sold pretty well in 2013. And then Bitcoin Black Friday 2013, we sold thousands of them. It absolutely exploded. We could not keep up with the demand. We had so many angry people complaining on Bitcoin Talk because of the amount of time it took to get to them. But we had a blast. And then in 2014, I was introduced to Monero when it launched. And
there was a bit of a community takeover because the guy that created Monero wanted it to be merge mined. The community said no. He was like, well, screw you guys. I'm doing it anyway. And so the community was like, well, how about we just don't let you? And so we maintained these two code forks in parallel, and eventually he just disappeared. And so I kind of was the de facto lead maintainer of Monero from its outset in 2014 till 2019 when I stepped back. And along the way, I built a bunch of stuff. I invented something called Open Alias, which is an aliasing system. I invented something called Yat, which is an emoji-based aliasing system.
I remember that too. I think I have some, Yats from back, the frenzy of 2021. That was a fun time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Built that. I have 19 patents in the blockchain and DID space. So, it's an area of research as well that's very close to my heart. I've been in crypto at this point now for nearly 16 years. Nearly 15 years. I've built all sorts of things. I've had the most fun. I'm very opinionated about a lot of things,
which is why I got to have you on the podcast.
I've called out a lot of people over the years. I'm not ashamed to call people out as scammers, and that's not to say that when I say that something's a scam or somebody is a scammer, that's not to say that they're ill-intentioned. I think there's a lot of unintentional scammers. They want to do good. They believe very fervently in something, but at the end of the day, it just ends up amounting to a scam because it's built on false premises and false promises.
That's a good jumping off point because we will get into the filter discussion here, but I will say you conspicuously left off that you were recently named one of WorldCoin's top 25 creators, which is hilarious because you're not a WorldCoin fan. What's the story behind that?
So I'm a very loud WorldCoin critic. I have directly called Sam Altman a scammer. I don't think that OpenAI is a scam, but I think that he saw the opportunity that all of the stuff, and you see it now with Sora too. He's absolutely embracing the fact that you can make deepfake videos and that other people can make deepfake videos. And he saw that coming and he's like, well, we got to have an eyeball scanner. It's the only way. And it's not only does it not work because you can buy a WorldCoin identity on Telegram today. There's Telegram channels where you can buy one for sub $10. That's not ideal. You can buy them for $2 if it's from an African country. So it doesn't work. But then it's also deeply dystopian. They had this promo video where honestly, this dude looked like he was on a date and his date eyeball scanned him. That's the most dystopian thing. So I criticized WorldCoin. Then I made a satirical video of
I saw the video. It's a good video.
It was VO3. It was VO3 just come out, and I made the satirical video of the wonderful future of WorldCoin. I said it's a leaked trading video, and it's all these people going I almost went on a date with a guy who had once kicked a puppy. Thank goodness, WorldCoin helped me avoid that, And it's all about office snitching, and the one girl even snitches on her sister. And it's it's so obviously satirical. And then a bunch of WorldCoin people piled on and they're this isn't a leaked video. And I'm no, don't say. And that's been good for months, right? It's been up, it's been pinned on my X profile. And suddenly a few weeks ago, I started getting in lists of the world's most influential WorldCoin people. And I'm do you not realize that all I tweet about WorldCoin is how bad it is? But I guess there's some algorithm that scraped how many tweets you have about WorldCoin or the reach that those tweets have gotten. And mine have gotten a lot of reach because of my criticism. And hey, so now I'm a WorldCoin influencer. So I'm waiting for my payout, I guess.
Maybe we'll come back to AI and identity towards the end, but I want to switch and talk about filters. I've covered the filter debate on this podcast. I tried to cover it neutrally the first few months. I'm not neutral. I'm strongly opinionated. You've been chiming on the filter debate, which is why you kind of popped up on my radar because it's isn't that the Monero guy talking about this? And you've had some great insights. And so I guess, what is your, just broadly, like, what's your take on the filter debate in Bitcoin right now, like high level overall?
Yeah. So I think my concern with the filter debate is it's a little bit like the block size debate. It seems deceptively simple. And so what you end up with are people on one side who are, I don't want to insult them and say they're not technical, because there are some people who are bright. But the people who are very, very deeply technical tend to fall on the anti-filter side. And it was the same way with the block size. You know, there were people on the SegWit 2x side, or the, like, let's double the block size side, who were technical. Like Gavin is a great example of somebody, you know, this is somebody who was a Bitcoin maintainer for a long time, who Satoshi literally handed the reins to. So I think to say he's not technical would be deeply insulting. But I do think that Gavin at that juncture was quite separated from the technical weeds. You know, he was doing the conference circuit. I think he'd sort of like step back from, let me be deeply technically involved, to maybe being a little bit more surface layer. And so he was trying to carry a torch that didn't have a lot of like underpinning technical foundation. And I see that a lot as well, you know, and I think just like with the block size, the arguments are easy to reach. And there's so many parallels. I see it over and over again. With the Bitcoin block size debate, it was like, well, why do we want to limit Bitcoin to 7 transactions per second? Even with Lightning, there won't be enough transactions per second to handle everyone on Earth having an open Lightning channel. These were easy arguments to grasp for a non-technical person. They were, you know, and of course it became very emotional. There was that very famous video where Roger Ver was sort of like, you know, crying about like, we've got to think about the children. And I love Roger.
So we got to think about the children. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not gonna insult Roger, but it's kind of like, you know, there's that internet axiom or law that says that a debate has reached its pinnacle where somebody gets compared to Hitler. I think it's Godwin's law.
Yeah, Godwin's law.
Yeah, and I think like it's clear to me now that in the Bitcoin world, when we get to won't somebody think of the children, that's the sort of pinnacle of the debate. You know, that we've hit the upper echelon of where we're going with that debate, and that's where we're at now. Now we're at the won't somebody think of the children part of the filter debate.
So you, in my kind of research, you've done a lot of work and research on like nodes, Sybil attacks, like consensus systems, gossip networks. And you said kind of at the top of this, when you first got into Bitcoin, you said, I thought all nodes mattered. You know, it's interesting, Riccardo, is because I, during the block size war, also had a really like similar experience. And that's why I got into mining in 2017, is because that was a forcing function for me to finally understand like Bitcoin at a deeper level as a user, now professional. Why, let's dig into that. Why don't all nodes matter?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So, one of the things that I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with is there used to be a network called Fiber. And Fiber was like a really fast relay backbone for miners. And the reason that existed, and Matt Corallo invented it and maintained it for many, many years. The reason that existed is because miners are financially incentivized to get their blocks out to as many nodes as possible, as quickly as possible. But they are specifically incentivized to get it out to other miners so that other miners can then make a decision, or specifically mining pools more than miners, those mining pools can make a decision. I'm currently building a block, or maybe I've just solved a block. Now I've received a block. I need to decide whether to throw my existing block away and build on top of this block, or broadcast my block and try and compete with it. And this often comes down to nanoseconds, frankly. So, there's a very big vested interest in getting blocks from one miner to another miner as quickly as possible. And it's kind of similar to, the trading scene on like the New York Stock Exchange and similar, there's this whole thing where trading companies will physically get offices as close to the New York Stock Exchange as possible. And they, like in the 80s and 90s, this was a big thing. You were physically moving your offices closer and closer and closer. And then it was like, okay, now we're going to run like a fiber optic cable from our office. We're going to punch through the wall so that we can get to their servers. And like, what's the fastest path? Because if we have to go up to the ceiling and over, we might lose fractions of a nanosecond, and then our trade might get beaten out by some other company. So we're kind of like, if you think about miners from that perspective, that's their will. Their will is my block needs to get out as quickly as possible. But it really answers the question as to why do all nodes not matter? Because if they broadcast their block and it gets to every single node really quickly, but it doesn't get to other miners as quickly, they will be orphaned. So that already gives you an indication as to why some nodes are second-class citizens from the perspective of mining. And frankly, I mean, I think, that stands to reason. The consensus mechanism is mining. I don't think we need to like beat around the bush that like other nodes are somehow important because, like miners don't matter or anything. I think that's kind of a dead argument. Miners clearly matter. It's obvious that like that's the consensus mechanism. And so their ability to route and path blocks as quickly as possible in Bitcoin's flood-full gossip network is hypercritical. Fiber eventually got wound down for a number of reasons. Cost to maintain was one of them. There were some other reasons, like we got compact blocks, which made relay like significantly faster. So that's all wonderful. It does not solve the underlying problem. It's not like compact blocks totally defeats the purpose of fiber. But I think it's a valuable data point for this reason. Imagine a world where 100% of nodes outside of mining nodes had to implement filters. Whatever those filters are, we don't, let's hypothetically say they implemented and all agreed on filters. I can tell you right now that fiber or something similar would make a comeback, because the very existence of filters in the floodful network, where miners have generally agreed they don't need fiber anymore because of compact blocks, they would go, well, this is actually deeply problematic to me because I need blocks and transactions to flow between me and other miners as quickly as possible. So it's kind of like you cut off your nose to spite your face, because you get filters to 100%. You've solved the filter problem. You've filtered out all the stuff you don't like. And then miners just go and slap fiber back into, I mean, if the code still exists, they can reactivate it overnight. And, there's the end. That's the end of that, because now anyone can connect to fiber and broadcast their transaction directly to all the miners that are part of that. And it was like 100% of mining pools. There was no mining pool not using fiber. So I kind of think when you consider from that perspective, you can see how it's idealistic to say all nodes matter, when clearly from the perspective of miners, they don't.
It's interesting because you describe a phenomenon we basically saw this summer with transaction inclusion of transactions below the standard fee rate relayed by Core and Knots. And, sharp, highly intuitive people could make the assessment that maybe we are seeing a comeback of that type of peering that you describe. I'll double tap on this a bit. There's another narrative here where people are counting reachable nodes and saying, of the nodes we can see X% are Bitcoin Core and X% are Knots, and there's different versions, and the Knots node count is rising. It's a big feather in people's caps, and they're championing it. And one, we do know Knots node count is increasing. But how much? And are these statistics important? And I'll just an open question on this topic for you, because you probably know a bit more about like Sybils and just like this dynamic. Yeah. So what's going on here? What are your thoughts?
I spoke earlier about my very first thoughts about Bitcoin and me trying to break it, and trying to Sybil attack nodes. And I'll tell you something fascinating that I found in that process. So a node by default connects to 8 other nodes. So let's just say hypothetically you have 8 connections. We're not going to discuss inbound versus outbound and all of that stuff. Let's just say there's 8 connections. Now, my working theory at the time was I just need to get like a majority of those, like 6 of them, and then I can overpower the node. That was like, it just made sense to me in my head, like that's totally going to work. And there's something that I discovered that's really interesting. Even if your node is connected to 100 nodes that are giving it bad data, okay, and I'm talking about like withholding blocks, feeding it bad blocks, all of that stuff, like being really bad, it only needs to connect to one node that has a view of the blockchain to discover that those 100 are bad. And the reason is the heaviest chain rule. So we used to call it the longest chain rule. That's what Satoshi said in the white paper. It's not really the longest chain. It's the chain with the heaviest proof of work. So the greatest cumulative proof of work difficulty. And the reason is those 100 nodes cannot feed you bad information without actually building real blocks. And it's impossible that they'll have like 51% of the hash rate, because that's not what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to Sybil attack your node. So when you view it from that perspective, it doesn't matter if your node connects to 100 nodes that are filtering transactions. All you need to be connected to is one node that is willing to pass you the transactions unfiltered. And that's it. It's impossible to prevent that. Of course, your node can filter transactions however you want. Like nothing prevents that. But if we're trying to prevent a transaction from reaching you on a peer level, that's literally impossible. Bitcoin's entire premise on a networking perspective, or from a networking perspective, it's designed to be censorship resistant. It's designed to be resilient. The entire design is built around the premise that an attacker can run 100,000 nodes, and there's only 5,000 real nodes on the network. So in that event, you would still be able to get blocks and transactions because they would find a way through to you. And even if an attacker managed to be 100% of your peer group, they would still have to pass valid blocks to you if they wanted to keep the lie up. Because at some point, you're going to go, I haven't received a block in like 3 hours. And you're going to drop every single peer and reconnect. So, there really is no path where peers can truly withhold transactions, not withhold blocks, and somehow that, prevents you from seeing something in the network.
You use the term censorship, and I often, like when I'm trying to be reductionist and talk to the average person who says I'm not technical, I describe filtering as attempted censorship. Yeah, I'm curious, do you view it like that? Because we talk about nation state censorship, and that is one part of the surface area of us considering attackers. But then we have what appears to be organic, I'm going to use softer language, misguided attempts to censor. Do you view it like that? Do you think it's healthy to categorize this as attempted censorship? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think it's very real censorship. I think I think to try and mislabel it as anything other than censorship is deeply problematic, because filter proponents are very clear that they don't want spam or arbitrary data on Bitcoin. And so their proposal is to censor that data. Now they can use other terms for it, but it's censorship, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with using that term. The problem is, okay, so let me back up a second and let's talk about nation states. So through my work on Monero, but I've also worked on things like I2P, which is a network similar to Tor. So it's a hidden services network. It's the second biggest one after Tor. And I'm also very close to some of the Tor contributors. I spent a lot of time with Roger Dingledine over the years talking about this stuff. And I have personally seen a lot of very interesting attacks against various projects that I've contributed to, or that I've that maybe I've not even contributed to, but that I've been attached to or close to. I've certainly experienced, all manner of poking and prodding from my home network to friends and family who've seen compromise attempts. So it's very clear that. And by the way, this might not even be nation states. It could be, an organization like Chainalysis or some corporation. Doesn't matter. They are well resourced. They are very clever. They are playing a very, very long game. Now, when you start to think about it through that lens, and I want to be clear that this is not a boogeyman argument. It's not a level of paranoia. It's not paranoia if they're already after you. But there are certainly regulators and entire nation states who despise privacy. We see that with like chat control in Europe. The UK is very anti-privacy. Australia has taken a very anti-privacy stance. But they are a similar group that are just against like transactional freedom. And so if you had to like think about it and just for a moment, take yourself out of your position and put yourself in their shoes. You've tried things over the years. You've tried banning Bitcoin. You tried Operation Choke Points to try and prevent ingress and egress points. You've really tried over the years to stifle cryptocurrency. It's now, the chicken has flown the coop. Okay. It's gone now. You can't control it on a macro level because some of the biggest nations in the world have embraced it. Some of the biggest nations in the world have accepted it on some meaningful level. So you need to play a different game. Now, there's various things you can do. You could put some sort of like deep state actor in as a contributor. That becomes really challenging because they get one shot at putting something bad into the code. So that's not really an attack that you're going to be able to pull off. So now you start to think outside the box. And you go, okay, what do we want? What we actually want to do is control transactions because that's what we do with cash, right? You go and you have a lot of cash and you try to deposit it at a bank. Anything over $10,000 triggers a suspicious activity report. In fact, sub $10,000 can trigger a suspicious activity report because you wore a hat when you walked into the bank and the bank teller goes, I don't know. I don't trust people with hats. I'm going to fill out the report. So, that's the way that regulators police cash. They're not policing it on the ground. They don't have like people stopping you to say, what did you buy in that shop with cash? They don't count the serial numbers on cash and track them that way, but they do have suspicious activity reports. They also at a customs, and I'm just talking US because that's sort of a good baseline for other countries. Customs and Border Patrol, if they check your luggage and you have over a certain amount of cash, they can just seize that cash because, hey, that's suspicious. So there's things like this that are used to control cash. Now, there's no real equivalent with Bitcoin. You can cross borders without physically moving the Bitcoin. And so that's problematic. So now customs can't really seize stuff. You could have your seed in your head. And so that's kind of like outside of their purview. So how do they control the flow of transactions? What happens to transactions they don't like? Well, they have something called the OFAC blacklist, and there are Bitcoin addresses on the OFAC blacklist. And in an ideal world, they would go at a bare minimum, transactions that go to and from OFAC blacklisted addresses are not allowed on Bitcoin. We've seen mining pools in the past that have made a big deal about, we are OFAC sanctioned. We follow the OFAC list and we will not mine transactions that are on the OFAC list. And they have been so heavily criticized. People have absolutely lambasted them. That's not been great. So, maybe regulators use that as a soft touch. They were like, let's try this. If miners go, well, I need to be regulated because otherwise I might be banned as a miner, and they start to flock towards those pools, problem solved. That's not what happened. Okay. Miners were largely like, well, who cares? Even in the US, they were like, we don't care. And so now what if, and I'm just putting this out there, I'm just positing it as a thought experiment. What if regulators did not start the filter debate, but what if they're encouraging it? It's very easy to push a narrative online. It's very easy to spin up nodes, not nodes, to try and help the narrative along. They're going to do it subtly. It's very inexpensive for them. They have not started it, but they're taking advantage of it. I can absolutely see a state-grade nation-state attacker going, I'm going to run with this, because if I can get people to accept filtering on a global basis and potentially get them to accept it on a consensus level, that is a step towards getting them to accept other forms of censorship. Look, the next step's going to be harder, but you got to take the first step to get to the next step.
Hey, Will here with Blockspace Media. Did you know that we have individual feeds for all our shows? If you're watching the Mining Pod, Bitcoin Season 2, or the Court Show, be sure to check out the individual feeds. You can find them on your podcast player of choice, whether that be Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc. Just type in Blockspace Media and you'll find all our shows pop up, or just type in the individual show name like the Mining Pod or Bitcoin Season 2. Be sure to hit that subscribe and give us a 5-star rating so we can continue to bring you the best content in Bitcoin.
You know, you bring up this angle, this dimension of there's key people in the developing of these open protocols and the various clients. You have a well over half-decade tenure as lead maintainer of Monero, while you're no longer, that was 6 years ago that you left that. But a lot of the filter debate is centered around critique of other lead maintainers, specifically Bitcoin Core. There's a few names who are getting a lot of there's the criticism side, and then there's the actual disparagement attacks. I wasn't really paying attention to Monero as much during the 2010s, but you probably have some insight. What is it like being in this prominent role for this protocol? These are open source projects, freedom focused projects. What is it like being a maintainer, and how do you navigate the what seems like constant disparagement and criticism from the community?
Yeah, it's literally the most thankless job in the world. Imagine someone said to you, look, I'm going to give you a job. You're not going to get paid. Maybe there'll be a third party that'll pay you, but that might never happen. You're going to work really hard. You're going to work 6 to 12 hours a day. A lot of your work is going to be not doing fun things like code review. It's literally going to be talking to people online, herding cats, trying to beg people to do things. People say they'll do things, and then you remind them 1,000 times. Then eventually they get halfway through and then they abandon it, and you have to find someone else to either start from scratch or pick up the pieces. Whilst you're doing all of that, a lot of people are going to shout at you because everyone that's not doing the things you're asking them to do are doing them too slow or not doing them too slowly. You're also going to get a bunch of personal abuse because people will blame you personally for anything that goes wrong, even though you not only didn't write the code, but you don't have code to review yet. It is incredibly challenging. And, you can see and by the way, just to add, this never happened with Monero, but if you were a Bitcoin core contributor and maintainer, FYI, you're also going to be sued by some moron called Craig Wright, and you're going to have to hope and pray that there is a corporation or a group of corporations that are going to come together to sponsor literally tens of millions of dollars to be able to sustain your criminal or civil defense through these cases. If someone said that that's what's going to happen, you would go, absolutely not, under any circumstances. And the problem with being a maintainer is it starts off with you volunteering to do something, and it gets progressively worse. And by the time it's gotten to the point where people are launching personal attacks, and I had it, like I had the fat jokes, and like you can never trust anything a fat person says, like I lost weight since then, so I guess you can trust me now. Like I had a lot of that. I had a lot of like anything that I did was critiqued. Any thing that I said was torn apart, both positively and negatively. People read into things. It became very, very challenging, and I would love to say it was worth it. But it's really difficult to look back on all of that. And by the way, the abuse and disparagement continued even like more recently. There was even stuff, there was a whole debate, I think last year or the year before, that was centered around like, I still have influence or control or whatever. And I was like, I don't have right access to GitHub. I have no influence. But it's like, it's naysayers that now, 5 years, at that point, 3, 4, 5 years after I'd stepped back as lead maintainer, still want to make a fuss and a scene and so on. And it's really, really difficult. And I see like some of the things that I've seen about people like Gloria, I feel like it's beyond the pale to start to like insult somebody on that level for the job of reviewing code and trying to get volunteers to write code. It's so insulting to them as an individual, and then to post like things they've said out of context or their Twitter profile picture, and then make a set of conclusions from that. It's deeply unfair. I really think like if you want to judge somebody in the position of being a maintainer, you are welcome to tear their code apart and I had that, by the way. I had people going like, oh, he's a really bad C++ developer. I'd be like, yeah, I am. Like, congrats. Like, that's, you hit it on the head. That's why we have multiple reviewers on pull requests, because I'm not the best C++ coder. Go, you hit the nail on the head. Like, that's a valid criticism. If somebody wants to take a maintainer's contributions and review them and criticize their code, I support that. But if they want to try and take their political opinion or whatever, or their looks or what they've said and try and critique that in a negative way, I feel like that's not ideal, because maintainers do not operate in isolation. They are merely the hammer that comes down on the nail when the nail's gone from yeah down to yeah. They're doing the last hit. They're not doing all the hits all the way down. Those are other people doing reviews, concept acts, that sort of thing. That's all a maintainer does. They go, okay, cool. They fit the nail all the way down to here. Dink, last one. And now to go and criticize everything because they've done their last hit with the hammer, it is so absurd. There's like 30 other people involved getting the nail down to there. Like, go and criticize their views. I understand that. But like, don't isolate and take a maintainer and be like, this is our singular focus. It's so absurd.
So you've seen through considerable tenure in broader crypto on the inside of, some of these protocols, working on it. You've seen a lot of disputes resolve in forks, in just they die out or whatever. Where do you think this goes? Like, I don't know, if you can imagine what the next year looks like of the filter debate, does it continue to heat up? We have the next version of Core coming out. There's, it comes out like this Friday, I think. Like, where do you think this goes?
So look, I've pushed back to filter proponents, and I've said, look, it's very simple. You're just not doing enough. You're basically saying, I support this cause, but I'm not willing to actually go and support the cause. So, I kind of think like, if you had to think about it from the perspective of like voting in a political party, it's like what they're doing is they're very loud and tweeting about how much they love this political party, but they have no signs on their lawn. They've got no bumper stickers. They don't actually go and vote. They've done nothing in regional elections. Like, what are they actually doing except tweeting about it? Like, imagine somebody was like, oh, I'm a massive Trump supporter. I've tweeted about him like 20 times. But like, did you go vote? No. I don't believe in voting. Okay, well, so then are you really a supporter? And the reason I use this analogy is because filters, and I know I'm not even going to get into the fact that filters as a whole are fundamentally broken. The way that they're filtering right now is simply not enough. So they're filtering op return, okay? And they've got a bunch of arguments about like contiguous data and blah, 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 and all sorts of things that make no legal or practical or technological sense. Let's put those aside. There are multiple ways to store data on Bitcoin. You can stuff data into transaction outputs. You can put data into the witness data. That's fantastic because, by the way, it's 4x cheaper. Also, by the way, Luke Dasher is the one that invented witness data. So we can thank him for a cheaper way to stuff data on chain. You can put stuff in op return. There's an op drop hack. You can put stuff in multisig using op check multisig. So I've already listed like 6 different ways. Stopping one of those ways, even if you are perfectly successful, doesn't stop the other 5. Op return is not the most harmful. It's not the only way to do contiguous data. It's not the cheapest way to do it. It's not the easiest way because they're all equally easy. So what's the point? Do more. So what I've said to filter proponents is, if Knots said, from today we are filtering op check multisig, witness data, op return, and op drop at a bare minimum, I would take them more seriously. But you're filtering 1/6. In fact, there are more methods, but let's not even go down that road. You're filtering less than 1/6 of the methods that are used. You're not filtering the cheapest. You're not filtering the easiest. You're filtering like an arbitrary 1/6 of them. Do better. Go and filter all of them. And then if you really want to do it properly, don't just filter the transactions, filter the blocks. Make a consensus fork. Like, put in the effort. Like, you're a bunch of losers going like, we want to filter things, but you're not willing to put in the effort. How weak. I encourage them to go and do it properly. It's not that they, I'm not even saying filters are bad, but just do it properly. If you're going to do something, why do it half-assed? Why do it half-baked? That's all this is. It is a cookie that they have not even put into the oven yet. Come on, guys. Like, take it to the proper level, at least on a filter level, if not on a consensus fork level.
Yeah, to me, this is very clearly a consensus change, and I would take that a lot more seriously if you want to propose that. Okay, let's switch gears. We'll talk a bit about privacy. Bitcoin privacy. Again, you have a long history in privacy projects. Right now on Twitter, it's, some of the privacy tokens are hot. Zcash got a pump. Monero's been doing really well. I don't know. What's your read on like just the overall like interest in privacy across all crypto right now? And then we can get into like maybe Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, look, I will say this pump is kind of disappointing because it's not driven by fundamental need for privacy. It's not driven by anything. It feels very artificial. And look, we've seen it happen before, and there's a bunch of KOLs that jump on the bandwagon, and then you have a bunch of bots and people who've literally never tweeted about it in their life who are suddenly tweeting about it. I find that it's frustrating because it's a disingenuous reason for the price to increase. I also think, at this point in time, we're like 15 years into a sea of scams and pumps and dumps going back to like, 2012, 2013, where there were Bitcoin forks, and each of the forks were like, we slightly tweaked things. We made the block time slightly smaller. We changed the mining algorithm, and those things like flew, and everyone was excited about them for 3 seconds. Feathercoin was like wild for a second. Vertcoin was massive. And then
I remember those. Yeah,
they all died and no one cared about them because they didn't actually have any fundamental underlying reason to even exist. And that, I think, it should have made us wiser to this. It should have made us wiser to this as being an artificial pump and not something driven by like, wow, the tech is interesting and it's being used. Because let's be honest, when there is real price accumulation, and you see it with Bitcoin, it's driven over the years by distribution. And that distribution with Bitcoin has slowly grown from individuals to startups who have been like Bitcoin focused, so they've accumulated some Bitcoin. Exchanges have accumulated some Bitcoin. A big, obviously much larger organizations who are in the crypto space, like Tether, have accumulated a lot of Bitcoin. So that's happened over the years. And then we had ETFs and so on. So that's been an increase in distribution. And when you see a hockey stick in price, my go-to always is I look at the number of transactions that are happening per day. If the transactions per day are not hockey sticking, I don't think that's a word, are not doing hockey stick.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
There's a word now. Yeah. Then I simply can't take it seriously. Because, by the way, like the transactions per day might hockey stick temporarily whilst people are depositing and withdrawing to exchanges. But if it is not sustained growth in transactions per day, I simply can't take it as representative of any real change in distribution. And so I have to, absent that, view it as being manipulation. And that really saddens me because I want there to be more attention on privacy for a number of reasons. And I know you want to shift the conversation to Bitcoin privacy. And I'll say one thing about Bitcoin privacy before we dig in. And that is, right now, Bitcoin privacy is a very scary space because of the way regulators have gone after Samurai. And you can love or hate Samurai. You can think they were a scam. You can think they were idiots. You can think all the negative things about them. But honestly, the criminal action against them was unfair, is unfair. And I think I would argue that it is even less fair than the regulations and criminal actions that were taken against Tornado Cash. And those were unfair. So, that's sort of, both of those have had a chilling effect on privacy tech in the Bitcoin space. And that saddens me because this artificial pump does that even more of a disservice.
It's interesting you bring up Samurai because on our other podcast under Blockspace Media, the mining podcast, we actually, me and Will co-interviewed one of the Samurai developers. I believe one of the last interviews he had before they were detained. And the topic was because this is right after Ocean launched and Ocean and Knots nodes were filtering the Samurai coordinator transaction because there were op returns larger than 40 bytes. Anyway, it's kind of funny how, everything comes around again. So yeah, Bitcoin privacy, I've done a couple episodes on it, some kind of high level basic stuff. Like Bitcoin's pseudonymous and it's not really natively private. And there's some efforts to improve Bitcoin, certain private use of Bitcoin. I don't know. What's your thought? I know privacy is always kind of a cat and mouse game, and it's just always going to be an uphill battle. But what do you think the state of Bitcoin privacy is? Just not as you've got the narrative of how difficult to work in Bitcoin privacy, but just how would you describe the landscape? Can you use Bitcoin kind of privately?
Look, I think there's a lot of good efforts that are being made, like Cashew, Fediment. There's a bunch of stuff like that that's interesting from a privacy perspective. I think my sort of intuition here is the world that we want to live in because we're never going to get base layer privacy on Bitcoin. Let's just be honest. I think that is a ship that is it is stuck in the harbor. No one's ever going to be able to raise the anchor. Forget about it. I think that maybe with post-quantum cryptography, we might be able to slip something small in there, but I think it's kind of a lost cause. So let's focus on what can we do with it today. And I think the dream state for me would be Lightning or Arc or one of those is able to achieve privacy that is good enough. And the way that would work practically is you open a channel once and you very rarely, if ever, operate on chain ever again. Everything happens within that channel. You merely add to that channel, and there's a big enough circular economy that you never need to withdraw, because you can, within that channel, if you need to like cash out, you can still deposit onto an exchange. And so your channel stays open forever. And that's sort of the upper bound of what you can spend within that, and everyone's happy. And as long as the channel never closes, there's nothing revealed on chain about what you're doing. And I'm a big believer in like L2 stuff like Lightning, or on Monero, there's something called Grease that's being developed, which is similar. And the reason is the best privacy is ephemeral privacy. The worst privacy is something that can be stored and decrypted later, or that's sort of middle of the ground. The worst privacy is something that everyone stores for later decryption.
Which is pretty much already what Bitcoin is. Yeah.
Right. And frankly, Monero as well, like, is also, everything's there. Now, look, I think decrypting that is hard, and that's a discussion for some other day. But, effectively, like, you've got this giant database where even if the tracing techniques are not fantastic or not perfect today, they will eventually become perfect, and there will be additional metadata. So really, ephemeral privacy is ideal. So we want to shift the window from what's on chain to everything being off chain, because that becomes harder to trace, and you can build way more stuff into that. You can build stronger privacy. You can literally use encryption. You can combine pre-quantum and post-quantum cryptography today to encrypt that packet. You can, route it using Onion, I2P, all sorts of stuff. There's so many clever tricks that you can do off chain. Even physical transfers between people, like using NFC or whatever, where there literally is no record on any network, or on any comms. Like, that's the sort of thing that I think is where we want to land. Now, how we get there, I think it's a multi-year journey. I don't think we get there with Lightning or Arc in their current state, but I do think that very, very, very long-lived channels with everything off-chain will get us good enough privacy. That doesn't mean that like something like Monero ceases to exist or has no reason to exist, but it means that Bitcoin will then, at that point, be private enough for most people. And I think that is the state that we want to aim for. Good enough privacy for most people.
There are some like opcodes which enable covenants, which have been proposed. I don't know if you've looked at these or have thoughts on them.
Yeah, look, I mean, I love OpCTV. I'm a big supporter, but I think it's because some of my earliest thoughts on Bitcoin from conversations with people like Mike Hearn, who subsequently rage quit. So he's certainly not an authority that I would ever quote. But like, one of the things that got me excited about Bitcoin early on, once I decided it wasn't going to break that easily, was the notion that it's programmable money. And programmable money is not smart contracts. Programmable money means I can program a path for this dollar or this sat that it has to go through a bunch of checks before it can be spent. So, like, there's some really cool stuff out there that has been invented along the way. Greg Maxwell has put out a paper a long, long time ago. And basically it's this thing called ZKCP, zero knowledge contingent payments. And it's kind of the notion of like on Bitcoin, if you're buying something like the solution to a Sudoku puzzle, you've got the puzzle, you need the solution. The person selling you the solution doesn't want to reveal the solution without getting paid. You don't want to get paid, or you don't want to pay them without making sure the solution's correct. How do you do that? And so he has this brilliant application of zero knowledge proofs within that. There's subsequent papers that have fixed some flaws in that and have iterated and ideated on it. So there's that to me, that's programmable money. Why would we not want to improve that and increase the way that we can program things so that there's all sorts of cool things that we can do? I would love for my kids to be able to like spend Bitcoin or receive Bitcoin or whatever from like that I've apportioned today using some sort of gating mechanism that isn't simply, at this point in your life, this amount of Bitcoin is released, like time locks. And so I think that there's so many cool things that we can do. We just need to like pursue the programmable money stuff and stop trying to restrict how people use Bitcoin, because that is a battle that is fraught with problems.
Let's wrap this conversation up with a little riffing on AI. I see you, posting some LLM stuff on Twitter. You look like you're kind of testing things out, using it in development or applications and ideating. When do you get your thoughts on where we're going with AI? Like there's a tendency, I think, in crypto for people to say, AI and crypto are like deeply interlinked. And I both agree and kind of disagree. I don't know, like what you think about this. Like, do you like, you and I come from the world of Bitcoin crypto. How should we think about AI and where do you think it's going?
Yeah. So I've experimented with a bunch of things. I built an agent to agent experimental system where agents are able to create services and sell them to other agents. And so I've tried really hard to think about ways that crypto can get wrapped into an agentic future. I do think there is a world where that will eventually get to where, yes, for agent to agent commerce, it is possible that crypto plays a role. I think I'm going to disappoint a lot of people when I say that stablecoins are most likely the way that agent to agent commerce will operate, because they have to operate in the real world. And to be frank, Bitcoin and Monero, I would love Monero to be the solution for that. From a privacy perspective, but like neither of these are they might be good stores of value, but it's really difficult as a medium of exchange or as a unit of account, especially. For people to price things, and I've been selling stuff for Bitcoin since 2012, 2013, and like with open rigs, when we had to price it in Bitcoin, I wrote an entire system that would every 30 minutes go fetch the latest Bitcoin dollar value from BitPay and from other sources like Clark Moody and whatever. And it would then use that to calculate what the Bitcoin price was for a thing that you were paying. And it was updated every 30 minutes because the price might move. And there had to be like a 5% buffer because the price might move whilst you're paying. So that's the unit of account status for stuff like this. It's not going to change. So it's not to say that crypto is not important. And by the way, like AI knows that privacy is important. It's just that it has to make a choice, and it has to say, I can't have both. I can't have something that is dollar stable, that I understand the value of it intrinsically because all the underlying things I'm using, API calls or, physical goods or digital goods are all priced in dollars. It can't say, I understand that, but I also want privacy. Like that's just not a thing. Oh, yes, maybe there's some dollar-based stable coin that also has privacy in the future, and maybe AI flocks to that. But I want to highlight the fact that like agentic payments are unlikely to use Bitcoin. They're unlikely to use Monero. They're definitely never going to use Ethereum, like, unless it's stablecoins on Ethereum. And I think that's even unlikely. So I think that most likely they'll do stablecoins that are cross-chain. So they'll do stablecoins on, like some of the Bitcoin L2s. They'll do stablecoins on Ethereum. They'll do stablecoins on ETH L2s. They're not gonna care because it doesn't make a difference to them. They're actually kind of irrational. They're just gonna go like, well, what's the easiest way, cheapest and fastest way for me to do this? Oh, I've got a bridge and then make the payment on Base or Sui or whatever. Cool, I'm doing that. It's not going to be emotional about it. It's not a bag holder. It's just going to say, what is the cheapest and fastest path from where I'm at now? And it's not going to care. So, that I think is a very practical and real consideration when it comes to how do we bundle crypto into it. And I'll say one other thing. One of the projects that I'm busy building, and it's really cool, really exciting, is a multi-purpose browser use agent. And one of the humps that we've managed to get over is our browser use agent can get through any checkout. So it can get through a Shopify like any arbitrary checkout. It doesn't care. Wonderful. The thing is, it uses prepaid debit cards to do that. It's not paying with stable coins. It's literally issuing a debit card and funding it. And that, I think, is the unfortunate reality is like all of that infrastructure exists. Like crypto is not needed in that world. Like, and that's, I think, it's probably going to, like, there's probably going to be a bunch of people going, no, my pet project that does AI and crypto that will succeed. It got $5 million in funding from a bunch of blind Web3 VCs. But like, that's just, when you're in the weeds, you see how pointless it is and how unnecessary it is. And that's just not the world we're going to live in.
If we can program these agents to be Bitcoin bag holders, then that would be awesome. I think someone get Sam Altman on the line. You're a WorldCoin influencer. You've got the direct, yeah. Just call them up and tell them to buy. Do away. Don't burn all that VC money on all that investor money on Bitcoin. Only one person can acquire more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor.
Well, look, I'll say one thing before we wrap, and that is, if you had to like run an AI agent, and it was able to make money, whether it's through AI trading or offering agentic services or arbitrage or whatever, you absolutely could say to it, I want you to take every cent of profit and turn it into Bitcoin. You could. And I think that like that is maybe an alternative to DCA for the future, where people are running agents locally on their device and they're able to do cool stuff, and it's shuttling little bits of money into Bitcoin every day. Something to think about. That is an agentic future I can embrace.
The future where AIs love Bitcoin. Riccardo, thank you so much for coming on Bitcoin Season 2. Really appreciate this. And I think we'll probably talk again sometime.
Definitely. Happy to be on. Really appreciate you having me.